So let's go to views. I'll right click my views folder. I'll choose new EJS file. I'm going to call this random. I don't need to give it an extension because I picked the EJS file. It'll automatically get an EJS extension. We'll inject page title here. And again, we'll create a heading. It shows our page title. And we're going to display one other variable which we'll set in our root file. We'll, on the server, generate a random number and pass it to this view. So our view is done, but we have to tell the application when this page is supposed to load. Right now, it's not connected to anything, so we have no way to load it. And that's all the code. We're not doing anything else with this page. It's done. So where can we go? What we want to do is wire up our application, set it up so that if somebody goes to localhost 3000/random, they get this view. So which file could we go to add that path? Yeah, which one? We can use one of the existing routes. Yeah, we can put it in here. We want to handle a second GET request. But this time our path is /random. When we have a GET request here, we need to do two things here. We need to calculate a random number first and put it in a variable. And then we're going to render our random view and pass that variable. Calculate a random number. So we'll use math.random. You used it in lab 2 in your little rock, paper, scissors lab. It'll just generate a random number stored in a variable. Now we want to load our random page and pass it two variables, a page title and our variable. That's the first thing we're passing, just like we did on our other views. We passed user list and we passed lesson 4 as page titles. And now we're going to take our variable that we calculated on line 15. We're going to pass it to our view. Now, we could use the same variable name in both places. We don't have to use a different variable name. Some people find it less confusing if we use two separate variables. One that we're working with in our root file, and then a separate one that's actually displayed on our controller. If we wanted to call this also random number, that would be fine, as long as this value matches that value. If we save that, NodeMon should restart, and you should be able to now go to localhost/random and get some number printed on your page. So every time we refresh, we get something else. So in your assignment, you just create your 5 EJS views, and you'll create 5 different router.get methods, each one with a different path. And each path loads a different view. All of the content on that view can just be static HTML. You don't have to pass any variables.
And then it would be just backslash.
That's, you got it. So you'll create the 5, well, it will give you, the generator will build Express EJS for you. You'll just put some content on it, right? It will then, you then have to build the other 4 EJS views. You don't even need to build a separate route. The generator is going to give you index.js. You can just write all of your 5 handlers in here. You don't need to create new root files. We'll create new root files next week for a different purpose when we start working with database tables. Without the database, one controller is fine. We don't even really need the user's controller for your assignment. The generator will build it for you. You can delete it if you want. We won't use it. So now what I want to do, now we have this little 3-page application. Let's create a header with a navigation bar and a footer and a style sheet. Then we'll be done coding for today. We'll look at we'll talk about cloud hosting and how we push this stuff to the cloud. I'll show you your lab and we'll be done. So inside of views, I'm going to right-click views. I'm going to make a new directory. I'm going to make a subfolder. I want you to do this in your assignment. Partials, these will mean for the shared components, things that are not a complete page on their own, but things like a header footer. So now inside of partials, I'll right click. I'll say new EJS file. And I'll call it header. This is going to be the top of the page only, so we can remove some stuff. What can we remove from the template that doesn't belong in the header? Well, we'll keep the body because our navigation, the top of our body is going to go here, right? So it can be shared. But what else could we get rid of that shouldn't be in the header? Yeah, these 2 closing tags. Let's get rid of those. We'll put our title variable here because it needs to go in the head section. And now we'll create a little nav bar. We'll use a nav tag. And we'll create a simple unordered list that we'll style with Bootstrap in a bit. So our first link goes to slash, right? It's not the name of a page, it's just a URL. Second link will go to users. Our last link goes to random. We'll add a few classes to our nav bar later, but there's no point putting them in yet until we've added Bootstrap. We'll get this to work first. As it is, it's not going to look very good, but it's going to work. And then we'll add CSS in a few minutes. So now we want to inject this header into our 3 EJS templates, right? Index needs the header, random needs the header, users need the same header. So just like we did with PHP, we're going to use an include function in EJS to put the header at the top of those pages. How do we do it? Well, let's go to index. What should I remove from here? What line, what sections need to be removed? Yeah, everything from here, all that code's in the header and it's shared. So I'll remove all of that. And then we'll just call include. This looks similar to what we did in PHP. Let's do the same thing. The users, find your opening body tag, remove it all, paste the header, and we'll do the same thing on random. Find my open body tag. So now any changes we want to make to the top of the page, we just change the header, and all those pages are going to get that change. We go back to our browser and refresh. We now have a functional and ugly navigation bar. So we want to create a footer as well and include the footer in the same way. The footer is going to be really simple, just HTML only. So we'll go back to partials, create a new EJS file again, call it footer. What are we taking out of here? All of that stuff we already have in the header, take it all out. In here, we'll just put in a footer tag. And why don't we put in something like a copyright 2016. So we want this at the bottom of every page. So we get nav right inside our opening body. We get footer just before our end body, which is pretty standard. Now we can again go back to our index. So this time at the bottom, instead of including the header again, I'm going to include the footer at the bottom. This looks almost identical. We did this in PHP. Include header at the top and include footer at the bottom. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll get rid of those closing tags on our 3 pages. Whoops. Make sure you change it at the bottom so it says footer, or you'll get your header twice. And copy it one more time. So include your footer at the bottom, get rid of those closing tags, refresh your page, and now we should have a header at the top, footer at the bottom. You're giving me a strange look. Okay. I totally can understand that. I felt like I had food apple on my face or something from the look you were giving me. So there's our footer. So it shows up on each page. So we're just going to do one more thing with this application and it's done for today. And that's let's add Bootstrap, and we can add a few classes here. So if we want Bootstrap, we can go to the website, go to getbootstrap.com. Click download Bootstrap. And again, click this first download Bootstrap link. We can use the CDN to link to it. I'm going to recommend for today you download it, so we can just be clear on where to install, where the style sheet path would be. So I'm going to click download. I'll go into my folder. I'll just save it in here. So it gives me the zip file. I'll extract the zip file. It gives me the Bootstrap folder. Once you have the Bootstrap folder extracted, open it up. Open up the CSS folder, and here are all the CSS files. Let's copy all of them. Once you extract the zip file and you go into it, there'll then be a CSS subfolder. Copy all those files. And they go inside of public and style sheets. So there's the default style sheet express give the generator. Now we can use any one of these in our header. So we're going to use two of them. We're going to use this one and this one. So all of those are copied to public style sheets. So if we go to our header, add a CSS section. So first we're going to link to bootstrap.min.css inside our style sheets directory. You need a leading slash. Go back to the public directory. And then we also want one other one. Bootstrap-theme.min.css. If we wanted our own styles, we can also still link to style.css, and you could define your own IDs and classes in there if you want other styles in addition to Bootstrap. So those are the two files we want. And now if we add Bootstrap classes to these two tags, we'll get a proper navigation bar. So on my nav tag, oops, I'll add the class navbar default. And on my UL tag, I'll add the class navbar nav. This should give us the default Bootstrap navigation bar. It'll get a gray background that'll go the width of the page. It'll remove the bullets beside the links, and instead of stacking our links vertically, they'll be spread horizontally. I'll just check it out to see whether we did it right, and then I'll put my code back. Oh, I used the wrong tag. This should be href, not source. Sorry about that. So now we've got our little navigation. And I can add one Bootstrap class to my footer as well. We'll go to footer.ejs, and in here I'll maybe add a class alert, alert info. Should change the footer, should give it a background color and change the text and make it span the entire width of the page. I think I use the same class in PHP. So there's our little Express application complete. So I've added lines 8 and 9, and I added classes to lines 12 and 13. So now we actually I want to commit this to GitHub, and then I want to deploy it to a cloud server with Heroku. So I'm going to stop my application at command prompt. Go back to my command prompt. I'm going to stop this. I'll clear my console. So I'm going to initialize Git here, add all my files, and make a commit. Then I need to make a repository on GitHub and connect the remote and push them. So let's run git init. Let's add all the files we did today. Git add space dot. Let's make a commit. End of class files. So I have a local version, a local snapshot or archive. I now need to go to GitHub and make a new repository and then connect my local copy to the repository and push. So I'll call it COMP2068. And for part 2, Friday. So create a repository. I've already done the first 3 commands, the initialize, adding files, and committing. I'll copy my remote add line, paste it, and now I'll push my files. You don't have to use the command line. If you like using the Git desktop tool, that's fine. However you get your files onto Git. So now my repositories here. So make sure you have today's files on GitHub. So we want to get this application actually running. Deploying our Node applications is quite different than deploying HTML sites, PHP sites, or other things. Usually we just use an FTP program like FileZilla. We copy the files from our local computer to the web server, and they run. Most web hosting companies, traditional web hosting companies, they don't support Node. Pretty much the only types of services that will support Node are cloud services like Heroku, Google, Azure, Amazon, DigitalOcean. What's the difference? What is cloud hosting? We should probably talk about this. Something you need to be able to put on your resume that you've used and you know what it is. How is cloud hosting different from a traditional hosting environment? Like we use DreamHost in our PHP class. Anybody ever used a cloud service before? Has everybody heard of the term cloud hosting? Okay, well, this slide is on Blackboard. These slides, they're in lesson 1. I won't go through the whole thing. Cloud hosts, they're designed for several things. Faster performance, the ability to scale our application when we have a lot of users, and also economics. So with cloud hosting, we basically pay per use. With a normal hosting company, if you wanted to go and get a hosting account at DreamHost, you'd pick a plan and you pay a certain amount every month per site, $10, $20, $30, depending on how much storage you want, how much memory you're going to use, and how much bandwidth you're going to allow. If you go over that storage, it's like your cell phone, you pay overage charges, and they're very expensive. The thing is, if you reach a certain bandwidth, you don't get more bandwidth, which means your site application slows down and people are waiting. The idea of cloud hosting was to take away these kinds of problems. So imagine, for example, you were building an application. Think how many users something like the Olympic Games website that just happened. Think how many users that would have had. Okay. The thing is, we get demand spikes. We don't get a consistent amount of usage. So the problem is, if we have a lot of users at a certain time of year, we basically need to buy or rent enough equipment and servers so that we always can meet that maximum, right? So we'd have to pay for that every month, which is incredibly expensive, when most of the time we don't need that many resources to run our application. So the idea of the cloud is the cloud, if our server gets loaded, it automatically spins up another server. And now we have 2 servers running our application, or 3 or 4 or 40. And then when we have fewer users using it, those other servers turn off. So we don't pay a fixed cost, we pay depending on the amount of usage. So in times of low usage, our costs go down. But we don't have to buy hardware and run it to run at peak demand all the time. Okay? So our monthly costs actually change. And most cloud hosts, they come with a whole bunch of online services we can use. These are just some of them that Microsoft offers, and Node is one of them that most cloud services offer. We can also run virtual machines in the cloud, which is great. We don't have to have all the software ourselves and hardware. We can run a VM of something. In our networking program, they use this all the time because the networking students, they need to know how to manage a Linux server, all different versions of Windows servers, OS X. Well, it would be incredibly expensive. We couldn't ask you to go and buy all that software. But in the cloud, we could just have a server spin up an instance of a Linux server and learn how to manage and administer it. Now, cloud hosting, there aren't that many cloud hosting companies because it's very expensive. They have to have data centers all over the world and servers all over the world so they can serve things locally quickly and spin up lots of different resources. So we don't have that many choices. Amazon was really the first company. They basically created this whole idea, and they're the biggest player. But Microsoft, Google, these are some of the other cloud services. So Heroku is another popular one, and Heroku is great because they give us 5 free applications that we can host with. Okay. So instead of using FTP, we actually can connect any GitHub repository to a website on Heroku, and it will automatically just deploy. So let's do this. So go to your Heroku account. If you're not logged in, please log in. You should get this as a main page, and it probably says no apps. So to create a new website, you just click the new button and choose create new app. There's an optional box for name, but I would give it a name. Otherwise, it will give you some name like Riverbrick748. That'll be the name of your website if you don't pick one. So call it, it has to be unique. So I suggest, you can't all call it lesson 4. Call it like GC and your student number, lesson 4, something like that. Put your student number in, that way everyone's gonna have a unique name. I'll just call mine COMP2068, lesson 4, part 2, Friday, which is available. And click create. Once your application's created, you'll get this screen. We can deploy using, there's a command line tool. It's kind of like pushing to Git. You can connect to Dropbox, or the easiest thing is let's try that again. So I got to try that again because it flaked out on me. If you're logged into GitHub, it'll show your GitHub username and avatar here. And now it asks you to type the name of their GitHub repository. So I'll type in the name of the repository we just created and search. It found my repository, and then there's a connect button. Click that. So now my GitHub repository is connected to this application. There's a black button here that says enable automatic deploys. This means if I enable this, which I'm going to do, every 60 seconds, Heroku checks that repository for new commits. If it finds one, it will automatically update my website, which is great. So I'll enable that. And now I can just click deploy my master branch. It's now pulling all the code it needs from Git. The application's not very big, so it won't take long. It says successful, and now I can click the view button. So there's the name I created, .herokuapp.com. So here's our little application running in the cloud. I'll show you how the auto deploy works. I'm going to quickly change something in my node code, make a new commit on GitHub, and we'll see that it will automatically update. So I'm going to go back to users.js. I'll add one more name here. Rather than 4 users, I've got 5. I'll save my change. Go back to my command prompt and type git add dot. Actually, I'm going to do one other thing. Notice in my repository, I actually have the Bootstrap folder and zip. I don't need those because we copied those. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to delete that Bootstrap folder, and I'm going to delete the Bootstrap zip file. There's no reason for those to be in my repository or my application, right? We already copied those files into our style sheets. So I'm going to run git add dot. I'm going to make a new commit, -m, updated users, and removed Bootstrap source. Right? Described what changes I've made to that application in this version. And now I'm going to push again. Hit push -u from the origin to the master. So now when I go back to GitHub and refresh, if we look in roots and users, I now have my new user list. And if we look online, when I refresh, right, we didn't, so just by pushing to Git and enabling that automatic deployment, all my changes are here. If we go to Heroku and look at activity, there's an activity link here, it shows you the different commits. So if, let's say I make that change and then I broke something, if I want to go back to the earlier commit, I can just click roll back to here. And it will then load the old version. So this is how we're going to put our Node applications online. In the next week or two, we're also going to try doing it with Azure, and it's similar. We created a new application on Azure, we connect it to a Git repository, and it will do the same automatic deployment for us. So this is what I want you to do for part 2 of the assignment. You don't have to do it for part 1. It doesn't have to be running on Heroku, but it's pretty easy. Just create an application, a new Heroku application, link it to your assignment 1 repository, and enable the deployment. So when you submit part 2, you'll give me the link to your Heroku site if you choose to use Heroku.
Is there anything to do with deploy branch?
Yes, you have to click that button.
Okay.
That actually activates it. It won't sync. That's your sync to get from GitHub. And then if you've clicked enable automatic, from now on, any new commits will automatically sync. Okay, I just want to give you your lab, and I'm going to show you a quick demo of the lab as well. So for your lab, you're going to use the generator to create a new application called lab 4. So you do express -e lab 4, cd lab 4, npm install, and then you get your whole site. You're going to build a mini express site. You don't need any CSS for this. Each person in your family gets their own page. Okay? With one sentence just telling me something about them. Your nav bar, you'll create a shared header, put it in partials, and each person's name will be a link in the nav bar that will link to the page about them. Okay? No styles. You don't have to put it on Heroku. You can if you want to practice that. You don't have to. So all you need to do is upload it to lab 4. This should say 2068 lab 4, and give me the repository link. Here's what it will actually look like when I run it. You don't have to. So it will look like, whoops. Sorry, bear with me for just 1 second. Why is this doing this? Somehow I seem to have broken my app. Oh, there. Now it's running. So here's what your lab will look like. Right? There's me. There's my brother. There's my dad. There's my mom. You want to add your dog, your pet, your cat, your fish. That's it. You also can't copy. This is also a way of making sure you can't copy because you have to have your name and your family. Okay. Yes, my mother is a programmer, retired computer programmer. Okay, so that's it. That's the lab. So once you do this, you'll build 4 views or 5 views. So you need to have 3 to 5 views, okay? With a little page of text. This is really all you're doing for assignment 1. You're just writing more code and you're styling it so it looks good. Okay, so once you do the lab, doing assignment 1, it's really just a bigger version of this. Okay, so for Sunday night, just give me the lab 4 link. If you get it running on Heroku, that's great. I can mark them even faster because then I can just click the link and run it online. I don't have to download everything and run it locally. Environment. Okay, everybody understand what to do with the lab? We're good? Okay, have a great weekend. I will see you guys next week.
Sir,